Roshi's Bookshelf. I'm your Roshi, and I was just thinking about Harry Potter. But ta-da to that, because today our topic is Ted Kooser, and I'm interviewing Carla Ketner, who is the author of Ted Kooser, and I've got some questions, and I hope she has some answers. And I'll say goodbye and see you later. Hello.
Hi, Ariel.
So, can you start by introducing yourself, telling us a bit about your background, and what inspired you to become a writer?
Well, my name is Carla Ketner, and I used to be an elementary school teacher a long time ago. What grade are you in, Ariel?
Third.
Third grade. I taught second grade for a while and kindergarten and first grade, but I never taught third grade. And then I had my own kids and decided I wanted to stay home with them. And when they were old enough to go to school, I decided I needed to find a job again. So instead of teaching, I decided to open a bookstore. So since 2004, I have owned a bookstore, which is the greatest job in the world, right? Get to be around books all day. The only bad thing is I'm so busy doing all the work that goes along with it that I don't get time to read as much as I'd like. But I've been doing that for 20 years now. And I've always loved books ever since I used to read them to my students. And then, when I was a little girl, I loved books too. And when I was teaching, I read a lot of books to kids. And when I had my own kids, I read to them all the time. And I always kind of in the back of my head thought I'd like to write a book too. Writing a book is hard, as your dad said, you figured out. So I've been working on writing for a long time. But this is my very first published book. So it's not the first book I've written, but it's the first one I've gotten published. And here's what it looks like. Ted Kooser, More Than a Local Wonder is the title of it.
Yeah, I have here.
Yep, there it is.
When did you first become a writer?
Okay, well, I think I've been a writer most of my life. I've always liked to write things. In my head, I kind of think of myself as a writer. And then when I got my book published, I started calling myself an author. I don't know if there's really a difference or not, but I've always liked, there is that, but I've always been a writer. I started writing seriously, trying to get a book published about 10 years ago. So it's taken me a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I've written several books in the last 10 years. And hopefully some of them will get published eventually, but this is the one that found an editor and somebody who was willing to publish it first. So that's where that came from.
So what was your first book?
Oh, goodness. I don't even remember really what the first one I wrote was. When my kids were little, and when I was teaching kindergartners, I used to write books for real little kids because they were the ones that I was reading to at the time.
So you write books and read it to
them? I never really read any of the books I wrote. I've always been kind of shy about my books, I guess, because I don't know, I wasn't sure they were good enough to share with people. So I didn't read my books to kids, but I read a lot of books by other authors out loud to kids. And I thought these are the kinds of books I like. So I was going to try to write one for kids that same age. I remember one I wrote about a giant pumpkin a long, long time ago. And that one will probably never get published because it wasn't very good. Because, you start out when you haven't had a lot of
practice. First book is the hardest one.
Yeah. And then you get better and better the more you practice. So that was one of my first ones.
Yeah. What inspired you to write Ted Kooser, More Than Local Wonder?
Okay. Well, I am lucky enough that I live in the same town as Ted Kooser, which is pretty cool. Yeah, to have a famous poet, celebrity live near me. And in 2004, like I told you, I opened a bookstore. And that same year, when I had my grand opening for the bookstore, I asked Ted Kooser to come and be like the featured guest at the grand opening because he was a famous author at the time and he was from my town and I thought people would come to the store to see him. So I asked him to come and be our speaker. And between the time I asked him and the time that we had our grand opening, he got a huge honor. He was named the United States Poet Laureate. So he became like extra famous. And that meant that my grand opening at my bookstore was really big because everybody who knew him wanted to come and help him celebrate and stuff. So we had a big grand opening then. And ever since then, every time he has a new book out, we have a party for him here at the bookstore. And we had a birthday party for him one year, and he always comes in and signs books for me. And he's just a really great person, very nice and
That
fun.
sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's very
You're
awesome.
really lucky
And
that he lives near you.
I am. And I decided, since I felt so lucky to know him, and I felt like other people, especially kids, should have a chance to get to know his story and who he is too. And that's why I decided to write the book about him. It's kind of scary to write a book about a famous author because and a poet, because he's a really good writer, and I never had a book published, so I didn't know if I was good enough to do it or not.
Well,
But
it did get published, so let's think it is.
yeah, I think so. And I think he likes it, which makes me happy too.
Yeah. I really like your book, and I think you express the story in a very good way.
Thank you.
How did you come up with the title?
The title refers to one of his books. Ted Kooser wrote this book it's called Local Wonders, Seasons in the Bohemian Alps. And it is about the part of Nebraska where Ted and I live. And it's all kinds of essays and stories about our area of the country. And I thought, since he had a book called Local Wonders, and he is a local wonder, I thought, well, that would be a good title for the book then. So I kind of took it from his book. And this is one of my favorites of his books too.
Yeah. When did you first hear about Ted Kooser?
Oh, goodness. Even before I opened the bookstore, I had heard about him. And I remember one time, we live in a very small town. Do you live in a big city or small town?
We sort of live, I don't really know, but we live near Miami, but it's not really that big.
Okay. Well, I live in a really small town, and my bookstore is the only bookstore in town. So before we had the bookstore, Ted Kooser used to sign books. Like one time he came to the bank here in town and signed books at the bank. And that's where I met him for the first time. So, that's a small town kind of thing to do. But that's where I met him. And I didn't really get to know him until after I opened the bookstore and, got to see him more often. So that's how I met him.
Okay. I never thought I'd get an answer like I met him at the bank while he was signing books.
Yep. Doesn't happen often, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's a very rare case, I would say.
Yeah.
Are you a poet like Ted Kooser?
I'm not. I like poetry, but I'm not very good at writing it, except that I think, do you read many picture books? I think picture books are kind of their own kind of poetry. And that's the kind of,
because they're always rhyming.
Yeah. They
sort
either
of like,
rhyme or they have a good rhythm, even if they don't rhyme, right? And they're fun to read out loud. And that's the kind of poetry I like, is the kind that you might see in a picture book. And I really like Ted Kooser's poetry too, because it's about things that are familiar and common and things you don't notice unless somebody points them out to you, but then you see how beautiful they are or how unique they are. So that's the kind of poetry I like. But the kind of poetry I write is more like what you would read in a picture book than a real adult poet like Ted.
Well, the only poem I've ever written is a haiku I wrote, and I only wrote that because it was a grade.
Yep. I wrote a haiku when I was about your age too, and I got it published in a magazine. You just now reminded me of that. Yeah, it was in the school magazine. I think I was in 5th grade then. So that was probably my first published poem. It was funny. It was about a little dewdrop.
Ooh, sounds interesting. What is your favorite poem that Ted Kooser ever wrote?
My favorite one happens to be in the book. There's two, actually I have 2 favorites and they're both in here. One of them is the one about the snow fence, the one with the picture of the dog. This one. Can you see it there?
Yeah.
And the poem is called Snow Fence. Do you know what a snow fence is, or do you not get snow down there?
You don't get snow here. Because I live
Well,
in Florida.
yeah. Where I live, it snows quite a bit and it gets really windy. So a snow fence is a red fence that like they put it out in the fields, or I remember them on our playground at school. They put up a fence like this, and then the snow blows up against the fence and it all stays mostly on one side of the fence instead of blowing all over your playground or into your yard and stuff. So snow fences are kind of meant to keep blowing snow out of your yard.
Yeah.
So that's what that poem is about. And then my other favorite one is the last poem in the book. It's called Selecting a Reader. And it's about what kind of a person reads Ted's books. And I think it's funny because it shows Ted's sense of humor. Do you want me to read it, or?
Yeah, sure, you can go
Okay.
ahead.
This one's called Selecting a Reader. First, I would have her be beautiful, and walking carefully up on my poetry at the loneliest moment of an afternoon, her hair still damp at the neck from washing it. She should be wearing a raincoat, an old one, dirty from not having money enough for the cleaners. She'll take out her glasses, and there in the bookstore, she'll thumb over my poems, then put the book back on the shelf. She'll say to herself, for that kind of money, I can get my raincoat cleaned. And she will. I just think that's a funny way for Ted to think about people who read his books.
That does sound funny.
Yeah.
Selecting reader. I never thought of, like, if you wrote a book, I never thought you could select reader. I thought more like it was the reader selecting your book.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? And when writers write books, they have the kind of readers in mind that they want to read their books. Like when I wrote this one, I wanted kids to read it, and also adults who know who Ted Kooser is and who like him and his poetry. So I had two different audiences in mind for my book.
What do you think Ted Kooser was thinking when he found out he was the official book poet of America? Because that's a pretty big deal, and I would be like, yay!
I'm pretty sure that's what he was thinking.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the story he told me about that day.
Oh, nice.
He got the phone call and he was on his way to go somewhere, getting ready to leave the house to go somewhere when he got the phone call. And he was so excited that he backed out of his garage without opening the garage door because he got all mixed up. So that tells you a little bit about how big a deal it was to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was a funny
Backed
story.
out of the garage without opening the garage?
Yeah, isn't that a oops?
Yeah, it's pretty big.
It's a pretty big oops.
You should write a poem about it.
I bet he did. Yeah.
Are there any interesting things that happened in your life that you would include in a poem, if you could?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know. I guess, Ted writes a lot of poems about living in the country and the animals that we see in the country. And one of my very favorite things, I live in the country too, and we have a pond in our front yard, and we have a big, I think it's a blue heron, but it might be a crane of some kind. I'm not sure exactly what kind of bird it is, but I would write a poem about him sometime. And this is what he looks like.
Yeah, there's the poem.
Yeah, Ted wrote a poem about one too, but the one that's in our yard, we named him Harry because we think he's a heron. So,
yeah,
and he comes back every winter or every spring after being gone for the winter. And we watch for him all spring and summer on our pond. So I'd write a poem about him.
How long did it take to write the book?
Well, I started it, let's see, in 2019 was when I had the idea for it. And then I had to do some research because it's a true book about Ted and his actual childhood. So I had to find out the facts. So I did a lot of reading and I interviewed him and asked him questions about his childhood. And I tried to find what I thought would be the most interesting way to approach his life that, kids would like to read about too. So,
Kids are in their childhood, and I think it's very good that like it's sort of like explaining his childhood and taking a big step to his adulthood.
that's what I tried to do. And I tried to make it so that all kids could relate to it too, which
Yeah.
is why I focused on the part about him feeling like he didn't fit in, because I think we all feel that way. Like you said in
Sometimes.
your video, almost everybody, feels at some point like they're not good enough or they don't fit in.
Mm-hmm.
Even somebody who becomes a famous person later in their life.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did that. And then it took me about 2 years to write and rewrite. And I got people to give me their feedback on the book and tell me what to do to make it better. And then I sent it to publishers. And after the publisher decided they wanted it, the University of Nebraska Press is the ones that are publishing it. Then it took almost 2 more years after that to get the pictures done and to get the pages all designed and to get the book printed and everything. So it's been about 4 or 5 years to get it done.
Well, compared to some things that I've heard, that's not as long.
That's a good point.
And it's
So
good that the publishing process only took 2 years, because I met some authors who did when it takes like 10, 15 years.
yes, that's true. It's
Mm-hmm.
a long, slow process, and it's very frustrating sometimes when you just want it to be done.
Yeah. What message or theme do you hope readers learn from the book?
Well, like I mentioned, I hope especially kids realize that you don't have to feel like you don't fit in, and you don't have to worry that you don't know what you're good at when you're a kid, because you'll figure it out as you get older. And it's okay not to be good at the things that everybody else, or that you feel like everybody else thinks you should be good at. That we all have our talents and our place in the world. And that's the message I hope kids get. And also that, well, I hope they learn about Ted too and decide to read some of his poetry and to study his poetry and maybe even become poets themselves or become writers, because they feel like if Ted could do it, then they could too.
True. Well, when you read a book about a little country boy who became the official poet of America, like someone who's living in an awesome place, like a mansion or something, could think, if a boy in a country who did not fit in at all, and I fit in like great with my friends, of course I can do it.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
want to be a writer too?
Well, yeah, I've been trying to do that all my life, ever since second grade.
Cool.
Which is not actually a long time for me.
not not a long time yet.
Yeah. If you could give one piece of advice to kids who are just starting to write, what it would be?
I would tell them, don't do what I did, because for a long time I was afraid to admit that I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't, like, I kept it hidden because I was afraid I wasn't good enough. And I would tell kids, you're good enough. Whatever you write, if it's important to you and if you like it, then it's good enough. But if you want to get it published, you will have to work hard at it and keep practicing and keep taking classes and reading lots of books and working hard. Because even somebody like Ted Kooser, he had to work really, really hard to become a good poet too. It's not like he just snapped his fingers and wrote great poems. He worked really hard, and he still does work really hard at it. So I guess I would say, don't be afraid to work hard, and don't be afraid to follow your dreams.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if you were a little shy in the beginning, you're not so shy now, and that's the good thing now, because now we can all read about Ted Kooser
There
and
you
some of
go.
his poems in the back of the book.
Yeah.
And I hope you write more books.
Well, thank you. And if I do, I hope you will read them.
Of course you will. Once you've written one book, the next thing you want to do is
Yeah.
publish.
And, I have written others, and I'm still working on some too. So hopefully I'll get more published. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can, when you're finished, you could send them to me and I can do reviews on them.
I would love to do that.
If you could travel back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would be the same advice I just gave you to give to kids who are just starting out. I would say, I'm kind of old now. I wish I had started being serious as a writer when I was younger. so that then I would have longer to do it, and to write more books. Not that I'm ancient right now, but if I had written more books earlier, then I would have had the fun of being a published author a lot sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had done that.
Yeah.
But I also kind of wish I would tell myself to be more methodical about becoming a writer, because like the way I did it, I just sort of, I wrote a book here, and then I wrote this there, and then I took a class here, and I took a class there, but I didn't do it in an organized way that would have made me get to where I wanted to be faster. I took a lot of detours and wrong trips, and those are okay, but
Yeah. I'm doing that now, and because like I have so many book ideas, so then I just got this organizer, but then problem with the organizer is like there's these all sorts of things and it's on the computer, so then the fonts get messed up and then
yeah.
all that, and then it looks all weird and wonky. Yeah.
And then part of my problem too is I have an idea, so I'll write it down somewhere in the computer, but then it gets lost and I forget about it. And then I'll find it 2 years later and think, oh yeah, I was going to write a book about that. So you got to keep track of your ideas too.
Yeah. What do you enjoy doing for fun other than reading? Because if you're gonna write, then you gotta read.
You do. You definitely have to read. I think you also have to live a lot and get experiences to write about. So don't spend all your days reading and writing. You have to get out in the real world too and do things and go places. I like to travel with my family and my friends. I like to go for walks with my dog, and I like to flower garden.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I like to bake too. Chocolate's one of my favorite things, so I bake a lot of things with chocolate in it.
Have you ever baked banana bread?
I have. I've even baked banana bread with chocolate chips in it.
That's what my mom just baked a few days ago.
Oh yeah, was it good?
Yeah, it was good. So, what are some of your ideas for writing?
Some of my other ideas for books? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. Right now I'm working on a middle grade novel, and it's a historical book, and it kind of has ideas like about what my mom and dad, maybe what their lives would have been like back in the 1940s. So it's set quite a while ago. And I thought I was about done with it, and then I reread it and I thought, nope, I still have to do some work on this. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Well, good luck.
Thank you. Hopefully you'll get to read it someday.
So, what are some of the illustration ideas that you gave to the illustrator?
Okay, that's a good question too. Well, the illustrator, her name is Paula Wallace, and she's from Nebraska too.
Oh, nice.
She lives in Omaha, which is a big city in Nebraska, not very far from me. But Paula, I knew her because I had met her a couple of times, and she's written or illustrated a couple of other books. So I knew her pictures the kind of pictures she makes would look good with my text, and it would go well to describe Ted. So that's why I thought she would be a good illustrator for the book. And I think she did a beautiful job. The illustrations are gorgeous and they're perfect for who Ted is. And I think that the University of Nebraska Press did a great job putting the whole book together too. It was really important to me that the book be accurate for Ted's life. So I sent Paula some of Ted's books so she could read them and find out who he was and more about him and where he lived and stuff. And then I sent her any pictures of him that I had too, so that she could see what he looked like. And this was the only picture we had of him as a little boy, as he's going fishing there.
That looks funny.
Yeah. So did you notice that that's the actual photograph of him, and there's the picture she made out of it.
Oh, nice. I like that. And he's
So
holding a pencil.
And he's fishing for words instead of fish.
Oh.
So Paula came up with all the pictures on her own after she read my words. And
yeah, I'm glad you two worked that out.
Yeah,
I
we do.
especially like the cover because like it looks like it's just reaching into the stars.
Yeah. And Paula did that, and she talks about how it's a scroll, and Ted's life is scrolling out, and his words are scrolling, and his stories. And I think it's interesting too. You have to think, does it start up here, or does it
in
start
there.
down here? And there's more blank pages scrolling out in front of him that he still has to fill, or you can look at it a lot of different ways. So I thought it was
I
very
didn't think
clever.
about it like that.
Yeah. And are his words going out to the stars, or are ideas coming from the stars down to him?
Yeah,
Lots of different ways you can think about it.
yeah. Well, that's very interesting, and I'm glad she had those ideas because it makes the book come alive.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We've run out of questions and time, and
Okay.
so thank you so much for your time today.